Hello there, welcome to Marcelian Online. The season has started and we need tanks. So many tanks that we cannot count them. There's only 6 specs, but they're not all equal in terms of difficulty to play, whether they are the easiest or the hardest ranked from a biased subjective perspective. Now, I have been playing all of the tanks for years and Blood Decay is no exception, and Blood Decay, whether you kind of maybe like to admit it or not, it's not a hard tank to play. Now, of course, difficulty is subjective and it depends on based off the level of content you end up doing. But if we are going to have a balanced approach, we're going to assume that if you're doing, I don't know, plus 15, 16s, or maybe plus 10s in the first week, then you're probably also knowledgeable about the tank that you are playing. And I do want to put Blood Decay in the easy tier. I don't know if it's like super easy to play, because although the rotation is fairly intuitive and the mitigation is also fairly simple, and to be fair, you don't really rely on your healer all that much or kind of at all if you play properly. If you mess it up, you might actually die and you might not know it until a few seconds later when it will be too late for you to make any other changes. Particularly because there's no, let's say, safety net in playing Blood Decay that like it was prior to the War Within, depending on when was the last time you did end up playing Blood Decay, where now when you get damaged, you can only heal that particular damage once. So if you don't know how Blood Decay works, your Death Strike, which heals the damage you take, is your active mitigation. That's retroactive, meaning you can only press it after you took the damage, and it calculates the healing that it does to you based on the damage that you took. Now, once you do heal from, let's say, the damage that you took in the last 5 seconds, that damage is no longer calculated in your next Death Strike, even if your next Death Strike is within like a second later, and it would still have that 5 seconds prior to it to calculate into its healing. That has changed how much, let's say, bad play protection Blood Decay has, because if sometimes you mess up and you take way too much damage, you can just spam Death Strikes a bunch of times and just heal back up. Now you can only really do it once, meaning that every global that you press is a lot more important and you're gonna be punished a lot more, because that is what tanks need in the War Within, more punishment. But if you manage to master that part of the rotation and kind of pre-plan a little bit, then you're gonna be fine, and you're only really going to have problems once the content outscales your gear. Brewmaster has been a particularly difficult tank across the years, since that it kind of has a lot of buttons, and it had a lot of buttons over the years, and it's not necessarily anything different now, although you don't play stuff like Rushing Jade Wind, which takes a little bit off of your bars, and I don't know if builds even take Weapons of Order nowadays. We'll have to see how that plays out into the later part of the season. However, the more complicated part of the Brewmaster is being able to maintain your damage rotation while also making sure that you're on top of your brews. Again, this depends on how high the content is. If you're, you know, a heroic raider Brewmaster doing +2s, you're likely not going to have any particular difficulty in playing the spec whatsoever in any type of content. So we're only going to assume that you're probably playing your tank in content that would provide you upgrades to your gear, meaning that you're probably slightly under geared relative to the content that you are playing. With that being said, I think Brewmaster is a very hard tank to play. I don't know if it's like at the bottom as the worst in terms of easy to hard, but it is difficult to actually master, since it does have a lot of rotation and you can get squished a little bit quicker than a lot of other tanks. This is not true for the bear. The bear is actually the easiest tank. Now, I do want to put out some caveats here. In terms of the overall spec diversity and complexity, I think Bear has more going to it than Blood Decay. You are a Druid after all, and if you essentially play in raids as well, you might also cat weave, which is not something that maybe, let's say, your average Bear tank might be comfortable in doing and knowing how to do properly without dying. So that takes a little bit of skill and forethought, I would like to say. However, when it comes to, oh my god, this is going to do a lot of damage to me, I need to survive type situations, Bear is very straightforward. If you press Incarnation, you're essentially immortal. You can spam Frenzy Regen indefinitely, so you have infinite healing. You can spam pretty much Iron 4 indefinitely, so you have armor cap. Usually we've been armor capped as bears since a couple of months ago, so obviously it's going to be way easier now in Season 2, so it's not that particularly difficult. And the rotation is very simple as long as you consume your Moonfire proc, supposedly if you play Elun's Guardian, although most bear builds play Galactic Guardian these days because of rage generation being so important. And I guess similar to Brewmaster, it kind of needs a little bit of a rework to be put side by side with the other tanks, since you don't have that much variety, meaning that your playstyle is pretty much determined, so that's kind of what we're basing this ranking on, essentially. It's not that difficult. It has been historically dubbed the easiest tank to play, and for good reason. Now, of course, you can still mess up. That doesn't mean that you can not play perfectly, otherwise you still die, but it does have things that other tanks would want to have, like Bark Skin being a probably almost 40% damage reduction on less than a minute cooldown. That's quite a bit. You can be a little bit tankier than your average tank. You don't do as much damage anymore, even if the tanks have been buffed, and they will probably still be buffed in the weeks to come. You might struggle to keep aggro, and going into a pack, Bear is one of those tanks that if you're not prepared and you're not sure what you're getting into, you will die once you charge into a pack, because you need that rage and you need those Iron 4 stacks to potentially not die. And because Bear's tankiness can scale to such high levels, its baseline tankiness is non-existing. You are essentially a feral druid. You can't even tell you are a bear once you take damage without any Iron 4s or any mitigation whatsoever. So that's where, let's say, your average bear will go and it's like, dude, why is this tank so bad? Oh my god, I cannot believe it. But the tank is not bad. You just need a little bit of practice in understanding how your resources work and how to approach a new pack. Prot Paladin, the beloved tank of the War Within, one that has turned the heads so hard that necks have been broken in Season 1. It's been so overpowered that people actually love to hate it these days. Now, be that as it may, it is, I believe, in my opinion, the hardest tank to play, or let's say the least easy tank to play properly, especially by a newbie or a new Prot Paladin. Now, you can play a very basic version of Prot Paladin that can do just fine to survive just a bit, but there are more criteria to surviving than a lot of other tanks, and because of your tankiness can also, similar to Bear, reach such high levels, if you go into a pack naked, then you will flat out die in about 2 cooldowns, because this is the world of Warcraft that we live in today. So you need to pair that up with, of course, Shield of the Righteous uptime, with being in Consecration to have that damage reduction, and of course adding defensives on top of it in the form of Ardent Defender or Ancient Kings or, God forbid, Bubble. Now, be that as it may, maintaining these in an efficient manner, because it's easy to press a button and be tanky. That's not the difficult part, but being in combat with the pack for like 20-30 seconds and eventually running out of defensives, that's when your skill will be tested as a Prot Paladin. On top of course, the reason why Prot Paladin is so good, the plethora of utility abilities that you can use to keep your party alive. It is crazy how many things you can essentially negate as a Prot Paladin, whether it is with Blitzing of Protection, Freedom, Spell Warding even. I think Prot Paladin to this day is the only Paladin spec that has access to Spell Warding, and that is a unique, one-of-a-kind type defensive that nobody can ever provide to anybody ever, and knowing when to do it, how to rotate all of these around while keeping yourself alive, while doing a lot of damage, because Prot Paladin, I guess it used to do a lot of damage, it's not doing that much damage right now. It does take quite a bit of skill, and it all comes down to managing your holy power that stays at the base of all of this, and that requires a little bit of practice. However, it can reward you very nicely. Prot Warrior has been dumbed down over the years, much to my dismay. However, it is still a very fun tank. I don't know if I would put it in as easy as Blood Decay. It can be one of the easiest tanks, and it used to be, let's say, slightly easier, I think, in Season 1, when you can just smash buttons and nothing really mattered. But it seems like Prot Warrior is going to be taken into a direction where that's no longer possible, and I'm not too sad about that. There's been some back and forths with Prot Warrior in the last couple of weeks of PTR testing, where We weren't really sure where the spec was going, but it seems like now it's fine. I kind of want to put it into okay, but I think it's a little bit easier than that compared to, let's say, the other tanks. I think I might put it with Blood Decay, maybe because I'm a little bit more comfortable on Prot Warrior than with other specs. Maybe because it's one of the more straightforward tanks in terms of how it works when you want to survive. Obviously, pretty much all of the buttons that Prot Warrior has are very intuitive. So if you're, let's say, like a new player and you want to learn what tanking is all about, if you pick up Prot Warrior, you open the spell book, you'll kind of 99% understand what every spec or every spell rather is supposed to be doing to keeping you alive. Shield block, shield wall, spell reflect, like all of these are very self-explanatory. You don't need let's say a particular guide in how to maintain it. Now there are of course levels to Prot Warrior where you can show off your skill and understanding a little bit more and do things that other Prot Warriors cannot, and maybe that would put it into the OK tier, but I'm gonna leave OK tier empty for now since that will actually go to Vengeance Demon Hunter. Vengeance was also a tank that was supposed to be fairly easy over the years. However, that kind of changed, where it's a debate whether or not it's okay or hard at the moment, since you can get to situations where if you're really not sure what you're doing on Vengeance Demon Hunter, you can flat out get squashed pretty heavily. Stuff like leaping into a pack without demon spikes will make you die. Stuff like leaping over a pack without demon spikes will make you die. Stuff like leaping over a pack with demon spikes will also make you die. Essentially, Vengeance Demon Hunter is Havoc, but with very strong defensives and active mitigation. With that in mind, you need to kind of still play a little bit of a older style of tanking where you rotate your defensiveness. Your demon spikes will some of the time not be enough to keep you alive, so you'll have to pair them up with, if you're running the Firebrand build, a Firebrand spread on all of your targets. If you're running the Illuminated Sigils, you might want to pair that up with the Sigil of Flame to increase your parry chance on top of what your spikes already have, provided you have a decent amount of crit. That will also increase your parry chance even further to essentially mitigate melee damage. That's probably going to be stuff that's gonna kill you the most, and of course pairing this up with your Fell Devastation to put you into meta. So how you rotate these around kind of stays at the base of keeping you alive as a Vengeance Demon Hunter. Similar to Prot Paladin, you do have a very vast utility kit, but not necessarily in helping your party, but controlling mobs with Sigil of Misery, Sigil of Silence, Sigil of Chains. There are very good crowd control tools that can keep mobs centered, controlled, Chaos Nova as well. So you do have a lot of that, and that comes with practice being used. However, I do feel that if you do press your defensives are way stronger than Brewmaster Monk, meaning that maybe that's where the difference between these two in terms of difficulty comes into play, since sometimes when you press your defensives with Brewmaster Monk, you're still not sure if you're going to survive. But with Vengeance, that's not the case. So it adds either a level of comfort or a level of, let's say, accessibility to new players getting into Vengeance and being able to play it properly. There are a lot of things you need to know as a tank to be able to get into the game easier, and the easiest way to also be able to tackle endgame content, it's with our player profile that will make controlling mobs, knowing which ones to kick, to stun, and which ones you're losing aggro on way easier. And we already have a video where Marcelian essentially explains everything you need to know about setting up your plates so that you can have the most amount of control and the easiest experience in doing dungeons without being surprised as to why you died. I thought I interrupted that. Which mob killed me? Check our player profile, easy to use and to import for everybody.